I was babysitting my neighbor's son Grady a few nights ago. He was a little terror, but his mom paid pretty well. I watched him a few times before, and I knew that the best way to control him was to keep him eating. Otherwise, he'd just run around the house and break things. That night, he was particularly wild, so I said that I'd order whatever pizza he wanted if he promised to calm down. That seemed to work. I called the restaurant and ordered a pepperoni pizza with pineapples and extra garlic. It sounded disgusting, but that was what Grady wanted. The man who took my order seemed pretty normal at first, but when I told him what toppings I wanted, he gasped and wouldn't say anything for a long time. Then his voice got all shaky, and he asked if there was anything else I needed. I finished the order and hung up. The guy had given me the creeps, but I quickly forgot about it and went back to watching Grady. We waited about 20 minutes until the delivery guy arrived. I opened the door and saw a middle-aged man holding the pizza. He looked too old to be a delivery guy, but he was wearing the uniform. When he said hello, I recognized his voice from the phone. I reached for the pizza, but he pulled it away. He asked if I was home alone tonight. I told him that the house was filled with people. I grabbed the pizza and basically threw the money at him. Then I closed the door. As we were eating, Grady asked me why I was so upset. I guess I had a panicked look on my face. I told him that there wasn't anything to worry about, but then I heard the floorboards creak from the other room. It sounded like the delivery man had snuck inside the house. I grabbed Grady's hand and led him into the downstairs bathroom. Then I told him to lock the door behind me and wait there until I said he could come out. He didn't seem nervous. In fact, all he cared about was getting more pizza. I left him in the bathroom, hoping that the lock on the door would keep him safe, and then I went to grab my phone. I walked through the hallway and living room, looking around for signs of anyone. The whole house was completely quiet. When I got to the sofa, my phone was no longer there. I knew that there was a landline in Grady's mom's office, so that was my only option. I walked as quietly as I could. I pushed open the office door, careful not to make a sound, and saw the house phone sitting on a desk. I ran to it, but someone jumped at me from the side. The intruder had been hiding in the office, waiting for me to enter. I was shoved onto the floor, my head slamming against the side of a desk. I felt a foot press against my neck. The pizza delivery man was standing over me.
"Where is he?"
the man screamed. I tried to answer, but no sound came out. I couldn't breathe. He raised his foot off my neck.
"Let us go,"
I said. "Please." He kicked me in the side.
"Where's Grady? I want my son back."
"Are you Grady's father?" He kicked me again.
"Yes, where is he?"
Grady's mom was divorced. All I knew about her ex-husband was that he was in jail for some violent crime, and she and her son had cut all contact and moved to a new town. I guess he had gotten released and ended up working some minimum wage delivery job in the same town. When he recognized his son's very specific pizza order, he was finally able to track them down. I didn't know much about this man, but I knew that I needed to keep him away from Grady. I lied and told him that Grady was asleep upstairs in his room. He kicked me once more and left. I waited on the floor until I could hear the man walking up the stairs. Then I jumped up and ran to the bathroom where I'd left Grady. The door was open and he wasn't there. I was terrified that his father had already taken him. I looked through the hallway and the living room. Then I found Grady in the kitchen. He had snuck there to get more pizza. I wanted to scream at him for leaving the bathroom, but we didn't have time. I grabbed him and ran out the door. By then, his father had heard us. He was running down the stairs screaming. I slammed the front door, led Grady to my car, and then drove straight to the police station. As we left, the man stood in front of the house and screamed that he wouldn't stop until he found us. Grady's mom met us at the police station. By then, we told the police everything that happened. They'd already sent officers to the house, but the man was gone. Grady didn't seem too scared. He just complained about not being able to finish his pizza. His mom, though, she got a really sad look on her face. "He found us," was all she said. They moved away after that. The police never caught the father. And as for me, that was the very last time I agreed to babysit anyone. Shortly after I turned 18, my parents kicked me out of the house. It wasn't surprising since we've never had a good relationship, but the stress from not having a home anymore was scary, especially because I was a woman facing being homeless on the streets. I ended up crashing on my best friend's sofa until she left for college, and I had enough to get a crappy apartment. And crappy is too nice of a word for the place I was renting, but at the time, it was the only place I could afford, and since I worked 2 jobs to afford it, it wasn't like I was home often anyway. Anyway, like I said, I worked 2 jobs full-time to support myself, but I never had anything left over after my bills were paid. So when my best friend sent me a food delivery gift card for my 19th birthday, I was ecstatic. I was used to ramen or boxed mac and cheese, so to be able to have takeout after over a year was more than I could ask for. My best friend was struggling at the time too, being a college kid and all, so the gift card was only $25, but for that, I was still able to order a basic combo meal at a burger shop. I saved it for my birthday dinner, and remember feeling so embarrassed that I couldn't afford to tip high. The gift card barely covered the food and the delivery charges, but I did manage to get together $2 that I found around the house, and felt proud that I could tip at all. The doorbell rang not long after I found the dollars, and when I answered the door, there was an older man who was frowning hard. He didn't say anything to me, but held out my bag of food. I reached out to grab the food from him, but he quickly pulled it out of my reach and asked angrily why there wasn't a tip added to the order. I felt so embarrassed at his words and shyly held out the crumpled $2, which he took, but not before laughing. He practically shoved the bag of food in my hands before he went off about how poor I have to be that I can't afford to leave a decent tip, how people without money shouldn't order out, how bad of a person I was for not giving him a proper tip for all the hard work he did. It went on, and after a couple of minutes of hearing the man yell, in which he kept stepping closer and closer to me, I gathered the courage to say a quick, "I'm sorry," and closed the door on him. Right when I turned my lock, the knob of the door started turning. He was trying to get into my apartment. I backed up away from the door as he knocked at first, but his careful knocking started to turn into banging on my door as he tried to turn the handle. All the while, the man screamed he wanted me to add a tip to the online order, otherwise he wasn't leaving. I was 19, alone, and didn't have anyone to call other than my best friend, who was at college out of state. I knew if I called my dad, he would just hang up, and I was too scared to call the police and bother them when it was over something as stupid as a tip. I already felt bad that I couldn't give the man more than $2, so even scared, I felt like it was my fault. Eventually, my neighbors across from me opened the door and told the delivery man that she called the police and they were on their way. The man banged on my door a final time and called me a name I would rather not repeat, then left. I was shaking and crying uncontrollably that I didn't hear a word my neighbor was saying behind my door until I heard sirens. After talking me down, my neighbor convinced me to let the police, who she had in fact called, into my apartment and held my hand in encouragement as I told the police what happened. They took my report and helped me call the food delivery app to explain the situation, and they assured me that man would be banned from using the app in the future. But all I could think about was that, because of me, this man, who now knew where I lived, couldn't work. He was going to lose his job because of me, and he knew where I lived. I ended up breaking my lease and staying in the local shelter for a couple of months until I could afford a deposit on another place. I don't order food through apps anymore. I know now, years later, that I wasn't at fault, but still, you never know who you're inviting to your house when you order food. They can be a nice person, like my neighbor who helped me, or they can be a raving maniac that now has your address if anything bad were to happen. When I graduated from high school, I made an agreement with my parents that since I wasn't going to college, that I didn't want to spend all summer working full-time. Instead, I opted to do DoorDash for some extra cash and to put money back for when I left, or just for my own smaller bills. On Friday, I decided to schedule myself to deliver since my plans had fallen through earlier that day, and it beat just sitting in my bedroom. I scheduled my shift to start at 1 p.m., and set the location to be towards the downtown portion of my city. I figured things would be fine, considering it's well lit and it's always busy. I didn't take into consideration just how dangerous people could be, even in seemingly innocent places. The first half of my deliveries went smoothly enough. The tips were good and the customers were nice enough. Around 8 p.m., I felt myself getting sleepy and decided that after one more delivery, I would call it a night. I crossed my fingers and hoped for the best. It took a few minutes for my phone to ping with a notification, and I saw that the guaranteed pay was $50. Of course, I did a double take and hesitated, waiting for the miles to load. I thought for sure that with a payout like that, I would end up driving several miles out of my radius. But it was a pleasant surprise to see that it was less than 18 miles, and it was headed back towards where I was staying, so it wouldn't put me too far out gas-wise. I clicked accept and went for it with nothing to lose. As I navigated my CRV through downtown, I ended up at a little hole-in-the-wall Mediterranean restaurant where I picked up a fair-sized order. It came in 2 plastic bags with 1 large drink. I made sure to handle everything carefully as I placed it in the passenger seat and set off once again. My GPS was taking me through the winding city streets. As I was driving, I examined the older-styled houses. Soon enough, I turned my car into an older portion of the city. It wasn't the greatest crime-wise, and often on the weekends, it would get rowdy enough. There were 2 sides to this portion of the neighborhood. On one side, you had the large-style historic Victorian houses, and on the other, ramshackle homes that looked like they could fall apart if the wind blew the right way. As I watched my GPS tick down the miles, it brought me to a home that I couldn't tell fell into which category. It seemed like a combination of both. It looked like a large home that had maybe been used as an apartment previously, with steps leading up the side to another door that was on the top floor. I parked my car and kept my headlights on, because even though the street lamps were there, it was still darker than I liked. Double-checking the delivery address against what was on the home's gate, I saw it matched and went around to grab the food and made my way to the door. I got closer to the door and something just didn't feel right, even as I walked up. As I went to knock, the door flew open, and on the other side was a girl who couldn't have been much older than me. Unfortunately for me, I was involved in a new beta testing project that DoorDash was doing that made it to where I could accept cash and give change. I opted in just to see what it was about, but right then I was kicking myself, thinking how incredibly stupid the idea was. I tried not to let my poker face falter. Behind the girl, the house was dark. There wasn't a singular light on that I could see. There wasn't even a glow from the television in the living room. Besides that, the girl herself was strange. She seemed stiff. It was like she was a marionette puppet or something. She stood there for a few seconds, looking me over, and didn't say a word. I cleared my throat and announced her total, creeped out by the silent act. When I looked at her, I noticed a hint of something in her eyes. It looked a lot like fear. I reached out to hand her the food and take the money, but when I did, her hand shot out and grabbed at my wrist like it was her only lifeline. I was startled, but I didn't make any sudden movements, and instead trailed my eyes to her hands. I noticed that on her wrist she had bruises, and 2 of her nails were broken off. Now, when I say nails, I do not mean acrylics. I'm talking her original nails were gone, and in their place, a bloody pink spot where tender flesh was poking through. I looked up at her once again, and about that time the door opened all the way, revealing a man. Not just a man, a beast of a man. He was at least 6'5" and was built like a quarterback. It was a giant contrast to the small woman who was in front of me. I stared blankly at them both, and he grinned, revealing yellow teeth. He made up some excuse about leaving the money inside and invited me in to get it with them. Something in my gut told me to stay where I was, and I declined, opting to explain that I needed to stay outside since it was against the rules to enter the home. I waited for them both to turn away, but it was just him. As he skulked away, the girl stared at me, and I heard her faintly start to mumble. I looked around behind her, and the other thing that stood out was that there was simply nothing inside the home. It was pitch black, and the only thing I could make out was what looked like a mattress on the floor. I had questioned where this man went to get the money, but the girl broke my train of thought. I could barely make out her whispers, but I heard her clearly tell me to run. I paused, trying to take in what she said, and she stared me down with this cold look and snatched my hand from my side and placed something in my palm before closing my fist around it and dropping my hand. Around that time, he appeared. He started to make up an excuse that he couldn't find his wallet, and for me to come in because he felt bad, making me stand outside, and I caught a glimpse of the girl who briefly shook her head side to side. She was telling me not to. Quickly, I smiled and told him not to worry about it. I said to consider it a good deed, and I started to step backwards until I was a safe enough distance to get in my car and drive a short distance up the road. For good measure, I took a screenshot of the address. I pulled my car along the curb a few houses up, so I was out of sight, and it was only then that I uncurled my hand, and I nearly threw up. The 2 nails that were missing from her fingers were now in my hands, tinged with dried blood. I started to feel my breathing coming in gasps. I shook my hand out into the cup holder and picked up the phone. Frantically, I logged out of my delivery app and called the police. The officer was nice enough to meet me at the corner of the street where I parked, and even he was shocked when I showed him what the woman put in my hands. However, it wasn't until an elderly woman came out of her house beside us that we had more confirmation that something was wrong. When the officer asked about the house, she looked at us both confused and explained that the house had been abandoned for a while and nobody had lived there for years. Things started to register for the officer, who called for backup. The officer took my information down and told me that I was free to go, and he would call if I was needed. The elderly woman, also with her interest piqued, watched as he got in his cruiser and headed to the home. When she saw me hesitating, she invited me inside for a bit to explain to her what happened. Honestly, I think she was just as nosy as I was, because by then, I was invested. I sat in her home for an hour, and all at once, sirens flew by her front window. At least 5 cars in a row, followed by an ambulance. I finally left after that and headed home. I was curious what happened all that night, and the next day the officer called me. He let me know that the home I went to wasn't meant to have someone living there. The 2 people there turned out to be a 20-year-old woman and her estranged husband. They had hit a rocky patch and she was leaving him. He wound up taking her after he lured her to talk about the divorce. She'd been in that house for at least 3 days. The man got too paranoid to leave her alone in the house, but he got hungry. She convinced him to order delivery, and that was when I arrived. The last bit of information I received was that she told the detectives he never had any intention of paying me, and she knew that. She wouldn't let me come in, because if I did, she was afraid she'd never reach help.